Anthony Giacobbe. These Italian names, man, I tell you, I can't quite get them.
Well,
I had a
you've got a
group
good
called
one.
Forza. Oh, good, good. I had a group called Forza APBA. A little. We should try to get the gang together since we're in the kind of the same area here in the Northeast.
And the food would be good, so we know that, right?
There you go. There you go. Former APBA Journal writer, APBA intellect extraordinaire, Anthony Giacobbe. I was just looking through some of your articles. The man was way ahead of his time here. Look at this. From July 2001, buying sets on eBay. No one's ever done that, right? I mean, God, what a trend that became. How you doing, and what's your Apple life like these days?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. This is what you're doing is fantastic. I looked at some of your other podcasts and YouTube videos. They're great. What I'm doing mostly these days is playing computer games. A lot of the action line and a little bit of Stratomatic. Not so much APBA these days. I still have some nice pieces of what was a much bigger collection, and I take them out every once in a while. And reading online all the great stuff that you and others are posting now, which I really wish we had back when things were just getting started. But it's fantastic. So most of what keeps me busy is the action computer games right now.
Awesome. Interesting. Just curious, why the switch away? I mean, that's always kind of been the big question, and we've got more PC games coming, and a lot of people want even more PC, and just kind of curious. I mean, there's a time differential, maybe mechanics.
It's funny, Jeff, and it goes back to kind of the reviews that I was writing in the early 1990s, but I really want something perfect. I want something that has a perfect game model, has every possible feature and every possible option, and is really easy to use and has fantastic customer service. And to me, action has the best combination and affordability. The cost is great. The customer service is insanely great. And I think the game, there's no perfect game, and people go back and forth about this feature or that feature, but I think they capture most of what's important in a realistic way. And of course, as you know, you don't always want the best teams to win either. You want coaching to come into play, and you want luck to come into play. And so putting all that together, a very easy online interface to play head to head, that's sort of where I've landed. I do play Stratomatic football, which is a real love of mine, but I always find the customer service issues, if you have a tech issue and stuff, a little bit less easy to navigate with Stratomatic. But it's a great game. I love it, and I enjoyed the APBA game when I did play it. It's also a great game.
What kind of projects do you tend to go toward? Single season, full season replay, single team, things like that?
I enjoy doing things with others. There are a number of sort of head-to-head online leagues, which is incredibly challenging. The level of coaching nowadays, Jeff, I'm sure you've seen it. There are no bad coaches out there. It's just a question of who spent more time with the game a little bit, but the brilliance, these people just calling absurd plays that you said they're not going to call that play, and then they call it, and boom, you get burned. It's really an intellectual thrill as a sports fan and a gaming fan to play against people that are smarter than I am, savvier than I am, and really share the joy of a great play call or a surprising play call, or putting a backup player in that has a particular talent and using that talent. It's great fun. And as far as replays, I don't do a lot of it, and I find I tend not to. I have great ideas, but I never finish them. I just read a book on the history of the Big East basketball conference by a Dana O'Neill. Anybody who's interested in the Big East at all, I highly recommend it. But it kind of made me want to almost replay the entire 80s, starting with 79, 80 and going right through it. It'll never happen for me. But it kind of got, yeah, I was thinking, if I had one person who's a Seton Hall fan, one person who was a Providence fan, one person who was a UConn fan, and I got them all together and we just took our teams and played it out, wouldn't that be great? But it's more of a dream, I think, at this point.
That's well, this is an open call. I mean, anyone wants to get in on the fun here for sure. You wrote a lot about APBA basketball in the journal. You wrote a lot of great things. Actually, though, in terms of using backup players, what is your take on kind of limiting usage of the big play folks or bringing in these substitutes on, certain plays like you just mentioned?
It's tough because you want things to be realistic. When we all coach, we all want to win. So if you have a player who can do something well, you want to use that player as much as you can. I've often thought to myself, gee, I'm foolish if I don't use all those resources. But at the same time, it can become unrealistic without limits. So I think it really depends on what your purpose is. If you're doing, for example, we're playing the playoffs, and you want to see if some sub was a starter, could that player have made the difference on that team? Well, why not? It's for you. We do this for ourselves. It's for fun. So have fun. But if you're in a league and the league is competitive and you're all playing against each other, most importantly, you have to know what those rules are ahead of time. But there should be some limitation. And I also always think, what if you get a lot of extra inning games? What if you had, in real life, they had a lot of blowouts, but now they have a lot of close games? So I think that a game and the rules that we set for ourselves should allow flexibility for a player to play more than in real life, because that could happen in the normal course of events. Something silly, Jeff, suppose you put in 200% usage, whether it's at bats, rushes, whatever it is. Well, if you think about it, if someone only had 10 carries or 10 at bats, they're only going to get 20. It's not going to change the world. But your workhorses, your full-time people, you won't end up in a situation where you're in a third or fourth quarter of a big game and you really want that person to give the extra effort, and now you're stuck up against a usage limit. So I favor some limitation and some realism, but I also favor a broad flexibility within that.
Well said. Speaking of competition, among the many things you've written for the APBA Journal, were some summaries of the 98 convention, which was in Millersville, facility near the headquarters. It was the 25th anniversary of the first convention in Philadelphia. And it's interesting, there was some talk about discussion that Ed Zach and Bob Henry and Pete Simonelli had about the psychology and the cosmology of the cards, the whole real mystical thing. And it really does kind of go back to that, it goes beyond the numbers. Tell me a little bit about what the 98 convention was like, and in that heyday when you had, that first heyday, of course, now Alpharetta, John Hurston's brought back that heyday with all the presentations. And what was it like in 98? It was a tricky decade for the company, for sure.
It was, and there was a vision I thought was brilliant. As a reviewer, I would work closely with companies, and I worked with Jim Tennenny, who was so great and really shared that vision. You'll recall, right, that they took the old game boxes and they got modern game boxes. They reprinted the cards. They still look the same generally, but they made changes along those lines. They got the boards. We don't need big heavy boards anymore. That was great. That's part of the history, but you don't need that necessarily. Make it easier. So Jim Tennenny and the company had that vision, and I was thrilled to write about it. I was thrilled to go to the convention. I met so many great people you probably know well, better than I. I remember meeting Ed. He had a table. He was selling cards for whatever that's worth, and I made an offer, and he negotiated. We went back and forth, and finally I realized what he was doing. We were going to end up at $6.66 because of the 66, and so I bought. It might have been I don't remember what team it was. Probably an old Mets team. I'm a Mets fan, but just meeting that person, and his energy and his enthusiasm was extraordinary. I played in the tournament. I know you mentioned in one of your podcasts sort of the rookie mistakes that people make. I was that rookie. I was just in the tournament to roll some dice and have fun and meet some people. But it was great. I loved it. I remember it. It was really a special event and a special time, I think. I'm sorry that iteration of APBA didn't work out in the way it was envisioned, and especially I think Jim's vision was brilliant and the company's vision. But I'm thrilled that they found a home in Alpharetta, and to see what has been done since then to bring it current is fabulous.
Did you ever make the pilgrimages out to Lancaster for like when the big season releases? I mean, that was kind of a rite of passage for sure.
It's funny. It wasn't my thing. Up here, of course, people would go to Stratomatic in Glen Head, Long Island, which is quite a long trip. And it was typically in February, so it was freezing cold, often snowing. And I just my personality, I was like, I'll wait for the mail. I don't need to stand in the cold to save 2 or 3 days. But I appreciate a lot that enthusiasm. I think that anytime you can get gamers together, it's an extra special thing to do that. And you don't have time constraints. You don't have other kinds of limitations that you have when you're home. And so you can really just sort of get to know each other as people who share a passion for a really fun, wonderful hobby. And I think that's great.
Nice. I'm just looking at an ad. I am interested in obtaining any old board games, especially those published in the 1970s, including Mickey's Fast Break Basketball, Nagamco games, Pay Dirt Football, etc. I'm also interested in past seasons for games I already have, and for APBA Basketball, capital B, very important. I have a few items to trade, but prefer to buy. One of your great ads.
There was a point, and there are people far better than I in terms of collecting, and who started sooner. I really got into this in the late 70s and didn't begin collecting until the late 80s, early 90s. So there's others who are way ahead of me. But there was probably a point in time where I had one of the broadest collections. I did buy a lot of stuff. I was ahead of the eBay curve. And it was also before people were bidding stuff up in a way that somewhat takes the fun out of it. What I would like to do is find someone who was done and just wanted to sell a whole collection and get something where you do lay out a few bucks, but you get more in total value than you're really laying out, and then you get the joy of looking through it. The collection of PTG, Pro Table Games, I had every pro season, every college basketball season, every hockey season. I mean, I had like a ridiculous, and I organized it. I indexed it. I had it saved. I had more APBA stuff than I do now. I still have some that I enjoy. So that was fun, and it was fun for me to see and touch those things. I didn't play them as much as I wanted to because there was so much, but I sort of played everything a little bit to see what I liked and what I didn't like. But it was a unique time, and unfortunately with eBay, it can get out of hand and it can become not affordable for the average middle class person. And so I think I was lucky that I got a couple of those before it was out of control.
Sure, for sure. Did you ever buy from Jack Cohn, the Card Father 1?
I think I did. Is he the guy who sends you like an extra team with every order?
Possibly. I never bought from him, but we interviewed him.
I think I did. Again, if someone's sort of in the business of doing it, their prices, which is very fair and fine, their prices are typically a little higher than what I was trying to do. I was trying to really grab value and sort of touch different things and see what they were like. And then, so in a sense, we live that 70s golden era when it wasn't just Stratomatic. You had this explosion of other companies, and I wanted to kind of see what those things were like. And of course, not surprisingly, you come back to, well, APBA and Stratomatic had it right all along. And that's not to criticize any of the other games, but that, things can be different, but that doesn't mean they're better. and Mickey's Fast Break, this is sort of one of a kind that people treat that game as a sort of holy grail of games. There's a good Facebook group. Most of the stuff I think is public because the Mickey, who's still alive, doesn't wish to sell it or wish to keep any rights in it, as I understand it. But that game is revered beyond belief. And I think at one point I had all the seasons for that as well. Maybe not quite one. 85, 86 is a hard one to find. I don't think I ever got that one.
Interesting. Basketball. Speaking of basketball, APBA board basketball, an introduction you wrote. There's a good old Shaquille O'Neal card there. Do you have any tips for folks who'd still like to try to pick up the old basketball game? And as you mentioned, the redo in the 90s, which as I understand, simplified it a little bit. And there were simpler rules in the early game, but just your take on it.
I thought the redo was great and was a lot better. I think generally people feel the old game is unplayable or not practical to really play fully. Some people joke about it, on Facebook. But again, Jim Tennenny was all over this. Jim worked tremendously on the game, and I worked with him. I would play test. As a reviewer, you can never get sort of too involved, but to me, it's a win-win. You want every company to succeed. And I gave Jim a lot of feedback, and I think that's a great game. Tabletop board basketball has its limitations, and especially with the modern game, which is so exciting visually, you're going to have to imagine it, and it's still going to be a dice roll, a card, or a chart. So you can't get beyond that. But I think that game, it incorporated a 3-point shot. I love the way it incorporated the 3-point shot, which was all the old games that tried to add a 3-point shot, I think had a barrier. I think it's easier if you just sort of start from scratch and make it part of your initial game. And Jim did that with that APBA basketball game. So I recommend it. I enjoy it. They also put, there were some sheets floating around where they'd give you 3/4 of a game in a box score, and you could play just fourth quarter if you only wanted to do that. I had those at one point. I love that stuff if you don't have a lot of time. And I also thought, I'm a Knicks fan, so those 90s were sort of a brief golden era for the Knicks. So that was a good time.
Yeah, for sure. We talk about, obviously you get the Zach Ed's handbook on baseball. And we're trying to do a little something with football here. I mean, we've got a few things going, but are there any particular identifiers for the basketball cards? Kind of any reads on those? Sometimes they also, with the golf game, it's been explained that a good roll can actually hurt you in certain cases where it's a little too much power. Maybe analyze, if you would, maybe the basketball cards just a little bit here for folks.
Yeah. It's been a bit for me, but I do. What I remember most was really the way the 3 points worked, and I thought that really captured the modern game, the 3-point driven game, and also, like we were talking about earlier, role players. I think there was more of an emphasis on a guy who's a good rebounder but doesn't shoot much, and that sort of thing, incorporated into the game. That probably wasn't as much of that in the original version of the game. So that's what I remember. And again, Jim and I worked on that. I said, how are we going to do 3-point? 3-point, this is the game. It's the future of the game. And it was the current game as well. And so that's what I recall of it. Like all the other upgrades, I liked the markers and the pieces and the way they made the board. I thought was nice.
Is there any way? Obviously, you hear about, particularly in the football game, so much customization. Talking about overcarding, undercarding. Did you ever kind of see folks trying to customize the basketball cards, or was it pretty well solid from the get-go? The formula.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of customization. I did, like with everything, sometimes people would come up with their own rules. And I think I recall some back and forth with people about that. I think I think Pete Ventura may have been involved in that before he started his own company. I think he may have played that basketball game, or I may have talked to him about it at one point. I think he had some ideas. It's hard to get a big fan gaming interest in that when you've got so much baseball, so much football. That's a lot of what I tried to do, was to promote that game for the people who were either basketball fans or wanted to try it. I thought it was well on its way, and really a fun game to play. I think Jack Ramsey played, right? When it originally came out, they got Jack Ramsey to play a game, and they were promoting that as well. You don't get better than that.
For sure. I'm looking at another article you wrote about more great teams for APBA hoops, some suggestions, and there was a group of G tops, the great teams of the past. Did you ever play with any of those, or have occasion to kind of look into the formulas there? I mean, in terms of calculating them in regards to their entire season.
I did play with them. I'm pretty sure they had a Kareem card from the Bucks. I think that was one of the teams that was in there. And there's just nothing like that, a Kareem or a Wilt or and I no disrespect to Jordan or any of those things, but that was the mastery of that brand of basketball that was played in that era. I don't think I had input on the selection of the teams, but I think I did speak to Jim about the set generally. And you want those players to shine, right? If you're going to play a mini league with those teams, somebody's going to lose. Somebody's going to be a 500. So you want at least the individual, the Oscar Robertsons and those sorts of things to stand out. So I think there was an emphasis on highlighting those special characteristics. And look, that's one of the tricks about basketball. I mean, how do you take an Oscar Robertson? How do you have a guy who's going to get a lot of assists and a lot of points? You have to set the game up in such a way that, and rebounds, right? He was the master of the triple double before Magic Johnson was the master of the triple double, and so on and so on. So I know a lot of emphasis went into that, and I remember enjoying, especially playing with I think it was the Bucks team that was part of that set. And I'm not a Bucks fan, but just the idea of those players was really cool. I'm a Knicks fan, so I'm not a Celtics fan. So all the Celtics stuff, not for me. Someone else could be the Celtics.
There you go. That's interesting. It's funny because, I always ask, or often ask rather, when you get your box of new cards, do you look at your team first or the champions first? Do you look at the worst teams first just to kind of see, or, you try to do some sort of order? And it's really hard even to play, and especially if you're playing, your Mets or your Knicks, I mean, and they're having a tough time on the board, you really just kind of got to roll through that, right?
Wait till you get to the Jets, yeah. So look, here's the story. I became a baseball fan in 74. April 74, I'm watching the Mets on TV, and of course it rains a lot in April, so there's a rain delay. So what do they do during the rain delay? They show the video of the 1973 World Series, the Mets and the A's. And 7-year-old me says, wow, this is great. The Mets play in the World Series. Well, of course, before too long, the Mets were terrible for about a decade, or more than a decade, arguably. And to me, it's about your favorite team. I would always want to see the Mets. If we had one or two good players, that was it. It was Tom Seaver, then he left. And it was never Pat Zachary, but so be it. I liked Rusty Staub. I would always look to see his card. I like Bud Harrelson. I'm a short guy. I was an infielder in Little League, but I was Buddy Harrelson in my own mind. That's what I would do. There's always a big thing about replay the World Series. That was never a big deal to me, because there's always this element of, right, that may not even be the two best teams who made it to the World Series. So I would focus more on teams that I like, players that I liked, and certainly if I was in a league, in a draft league especially, it would be the rookies, see who we're going to look to draft for this year, that sort of thing. I think rookies have a certain, magic. You want to see that Mike Trout card, when he came out and that sort of thing.
Interesting. Speaking of, you said you're looking for the perfect game, and Greg Barrett, of course, our football guru, talks about the perfect replay. What for you constitutes a really good replay? Is it, what's your margin of error? What are your key focal points?
Yeah, I tell you, my gut tells me, and I'm a math guy. I'm not an expert, but I'm a math thinker. My gut tells me it shouldn't be the same. Even if you say 162 games is a sufficient statistical sample. I mean, we know there are guys who have BABIP of 350 for a full season. Well, then that's not a sufficient statistical sample, or that would have normalized. So I think a perfect replay is where your best teams generally are similar to the best teams, but I like it when there's a different team somehow rises to the top. And with respect to the worst teams, sometimes you have a team that's close to 500 when you say they shouldn't be, but you want the majority of the teams to sort of fall in line. But I do not like, everybody does what they want. It's for you. It's for your fun. But I don't want to sit there and use exact lineups and exact pitchers and exact everything else and then say, well, I want the exact results too. That to me isn't as much fun. Now, and for those whom it is, that's great. That's wonderful. But I mean, just to again refer to action, if I may, we just did a computer replay of 80-81 with some friends, and it ended up being the Islanders, who you would expect, and the LA Kings, with Marcel Dion, Charlie Simmer, and Taylor. That was the one line. And the defenseman Larry Murphy, who was taking on Dennis Potvin. And the Kings were actually the 1 seed. They had the best record in the regular season, and they ended up winning in a 6-game Stanley Cup final over the Islanders in Long Island for Game 6. And I thought that was perfect. I mean, it was no accident that this team ends up being the 1 seed through the entire season and winning the cup, but it wasn't what you would expect either if you looked at the actual. They were a good team. I think they're maybe the 5th or 6th best team with 90-something points. But I was very pleased with that. And I felt like they earned the team that was playing on the computer earned their championship.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned this, and other folks have spoken about it. I mean, there's kind of a fair sameness in the kind of middle of the groupings. I mean, if you really go deep statistically, I mean, you've got a game here, a few games, and depending on the sport. Baseball, obviously, you've got a longer string than a football season. So, getting that sample size, and I guess it always. I hate to bring up the idea of APBA math and the probabilities and the distribution on the cards. That keeps coming up. I was just kind of having some questions about it. Some other folks had some questions about it recently about the 1 in 36 possibilities on the card. And it's not the same as a 2 to 12 distribution because each result is unique. So it's about 2.78% chance for each of those results. Dare we venture into that? I'm just kind of curious your take on randomization on APBA cards, sport to sport, and kind of recreating certain tricky aspects. You mentioned the 3-point in basketball.
I like the double columns. I think that gives you a lot of flexibility to add those kind of results. The straight 36, is limited in that mathematical way. And so when I saw the double columns, I said, oh, that's a great idea. And that also that you could have the first column roll driving, the second in some way relating to or triggering, the second column roll. I like that. Look, it depends. You could have fun doing anything. If you have a more straightforward game that's a pass and shoot game, a hockey, a basketball, a soccer, maybe 36 can give you enough flexibility to do what you need. But for the kind of gamers that we are and that our communities are, I think adding more variety helps. And it helps you individualize your cards. You don't want all the cards being too similar either. Stratomatic added that 1 to 20 with the split card. Those kind of things. Referring to a chart, can give you a bunch of different results. And with APBA, you have your pitching grades, which is, you have a chart is a chart, but it's individualized, based on your pitching grade. So I like those kinds of things. I like things that are a little, do account for, how do you account for triples, right? They're pretty rare. Are you going to give a guy a solid triple? I don't know. That's tough. So I think that for APBA's style, and that's the game. You're not going to change the game. That's the game. But I think that double column was a real clever way of incorporating more results.
Speaking of audience, going back to the 90s and the experimentation there, as I understood it, the smaller redone boxes around the middle of the decade were to try to get some retail sales. And then in terms of the 99 sets, or the 2000 edition of baseball, football, the 99 seasons, it was a lot more colorful. There was a kids version of, say, of the football game, just are very simple. So it seemed like, and while the company was doing PC gaming, but, there was always this sense. I mean, I remember hearing a lot about Dick Seitz being asked, and John Herson. I mean, any game company owners asked, would you do this? Would you do that? Why don't you do this? And there's a lot more complexity now in a lot of games, but I keep saying it's kind of a parlor aspect too, at least for APBA. I mean, it's statistical, but it's also, you want to try to engage folks at all levels of gaming. And I think that's what they were trying to do in the 90s. Is that an accurate assessment?
It is. I have a box. I got it for you. I'm sure you've seen it, but I got from my shelf the football one.
Oh yeah.
Right. And you get a sort of a modern game board, right? Nice little. I think we all thought board games were dying, if not dead, and then COVID hit. And the point of COVID was, to me, isn't, well, I'm stuck in my house now, I got to play board games. This is a really fun thing to do. This is a good thing to do. I've always played board games with my kids. We played Monopoly, and we ended up getting those sort of customized versions. And everyone, it was like, whoa, what did they put? What did they pick to use for this version of the game? So I think there's a place for it. It may not be in retail anymore because that's not the way we buy things. But there is an explosion, I think, of I'll call them homemade, really, businesses, where you can buy PDFs and you can get, who needs the box? You just get your charts and your cards and you can print them at your own expense, or you can deal with it, look at them online, whatever you want to do. I think that's a really great way for board games to have a real place. There's your conventions, the ones you're involved in. There are other companies having other conventions, one going on right now. And so I think we love it, right? That's why we got into it. I don't think many of us started with the computer versions of these games. I think we started rolling dice, looking at cards, looking at charts, often with a friend across the table or desk from you playing against you. And so I think there's a love for that. I think there's a place for that. I think there always will be. Hope there always will be. But yeah, retail, that's not how people are consuming these things anymore. But I love board gaming, and not just sports board gaming. And I think it will always have a role in place.
Now, you wrote a lot about collecting. What is, one of the questions that keeps coming up with APBA cards is, 56 set just sold for, I think, like $800. Some 56 baseball, 57 baseball around $510. Some of the football sets, the original 57 is fairly common vis-a-vis some other iterations, and with the idea that these new sets are being recalculated by APBA. Makes those older cards obsolete in a sense, but I'm just curious your sense of what prices will go. I mean, obviously you get folks aging out, but you get folks coming in their 30s, 40s, So another 2, 3, 4 decades of, potential movement in the markets. Just curious what your expectation might be for some of these older sets. Or
I think it's consistent with any other product. A set that's obsolete because it's been replaced has the value of its uniqueness and of its timeliness, and that can be worth a lot of money if there are two people who want to buy it. Do I think? I think the issue of our gaming population aging probably would lead to a decline in prices, but I've thought that for 10 years and it hasn't happened. I also think, sadly, I know this will break everyone's heart that's listening, things get thrown out when people either die or become unable to play anymore. I think we all sort of try and avoid that by telling the people we love, get this in the hands of someone, who use it. But I think while the number of buyers may be shrinking, I think the supply is shrinking as well. You have floods. I'm overly conscious of losing things to a flood, but here and there I have lost a few things. And you could have heaven forbid, I don't want one, but if you have a leak from your ceiling or whatever, your refrigerator, there's different ways that things can get lost or damaged, and they're gone from forever if they're something that's out of print, which a lot of this stuff is. So I don't know what the market holds. I love it. I love the fact that people can buy and sell what they want. I don't judge. If you want to list your 56 APBA set for $500, you have every right to do that. And if nobody wants to buy it, you'll lower your price. If someone wants to buy it, you get your $500. I've been on both sides, and I think you got to respect everybody's personal choices to buy or sell what they want at whatever they want to pay for. That's just my opinion.
Excellent. That kind of gets to the whole idea, I think, of board game etiquette, being nice, being, it's just a game, and play your game and collect your game the way you want to do it.
Well, yeah, but except when you lose, Jeff. No.
Well, that's the other thing too. Yeah. I mean, I actually don't play it's interesting. I mean, the idea certainly of football, it's like, is it really good solitaire? It absolutely is. I mean, I never thought I'd ever play face to face, but I was kind of stuck in a little town somewhere. You mentioned, you're playing some head to head. Do you do much solitaire? I mean, what's your kind of percentage of head to head versus solitaire?
No more. That was more when I was younger. And this is something I wanted to mention. I met a friend through a league. His name's Louis Tavaleri. He turned out he lived 5 minutes from me. And we played head to head, APBA, Stratomatic, other things, and had just so much fun. Louis was someone who really knew how to have fun. I remember, who's that player? Turkey Mike, one of the old New York Giants, I think. He used to love that card, and he was a very experienced APBA player going back to the 60s. There's nothing like that experience of doing that with a friend. I was able to play with my kids when they were younger. We don't play much now, although I suppose if I asked, they'd play. But that is, to me, so much more enjoyable than a computer game. Just to be across the table, and, sharing that socialization time. And Louis, who's not with us anymore, just made things fun. He had the right attitude. He enjoyed playing with you, so that the two of you were having fun together. And that was, it really brought me back to the face-to-face aspect of it. And there's nothing like it, in my opinion.
What have been some of your most memorable outcomes, either solitaire or face-to-face?
That is a great question. requires me to remember things, though.
It's-
Um, I guess, I mean, I'm going back to like 10 years old, but I had it was the Horrible Mets, and I think it might have been Jerry Koosman, and I may mix up my eras. But there'd been an early error, and he had a no-hitter going. And somehow in the ninth inning, there was a walk and a home run, and they lost 2-1. And you're sitting there like, are you torturing me? What are you doing? Just let it hit it in the first inning, So I do remember that. Yeah, my friend Lewis, who played Stratomac football, he would be punting and he would call the punch fumble. He was calling for you to fumble the return. I remember that. I can't say anything else really specific. Turkey Mike, of course. Lewis and I took some of the old app. We take the 08, which is a year I really love, and also 24. And we did a little round robin with the National League teams. We were both National League guys, just to play those players, touch those cards, roll the dice, have fun. So I remember a lot of that. But it's funny. It's a good question. I do remember some brutal computer losing on a Hail Mary. I remember winning on a Hail Mary. I won somehow on a New Orleans Saints Hail Mary where Drew Brees ends up dumping it to Kamara because nobody's open. And he runs 45 yards on the last play to win the game. You remember those things?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
My terrible Mets no-hitter, maybe.
Oh, man. Oh, yeah. Well, generally speaking, outside of the movie Dice and Men, of course, Scott Lahotsky's APBA documentary, what are some of your top sports movies?
Oh, wow. There's nothing like Field of Dreams. So here's my mug, Jeff. I got this for our conversation. I was able to go out there with my sons just this year, actually to the field. And for every baseball fan, I recommend it. It's in the middle of nowhere, but go. Take the time to go. Bull Durham. I don't want to waste valuable time on this, but I'm not a fan of the Natural, just not my thing. I'm drawing a blank on the rest, but those two, without a doubt, are really special movies that capture. There's something about baseball. I love football. I love the other sports, but it really captures something about baseball that's unique, and I think touches all of us who love games to this extent that we play these things and spend this time on it.
And if playing a game kind of replicates that experience, the spirit of the game, you're kind of playing a movie in your mind. Which games, board or PC, really to you go above and beyond to capture the real spirit of what at least we perceive, beyond the statistics, what we perceive a game to be?
So, one of the things I wrote about in the books, which was sort of a look at the version 1s and 2s of these computer games, was the play-by-play descriptions. And at that time, many of them were far too primitive. But even today, many of them are still repetitive and predictable when you're playing multiple games. So again, I don't work for the company, but I go back to the action games, which I think that they really work hard to mix up, and it's not just the words, it's not the terms, but it's the surprise, the unexpected things that get thrown in, or they've set you up. There's a reading where player reaches for a catch and he grabs it, but it falls to the ground, and you sort of think it's going to go one way and it doesn't, but it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes it goes the other way. And if you ask me what I would tell developers today, that's where I'd invest my time. I would add words, vary results, add unpredictability. And the same for the graphics. I love the graphics. I love seeing that silly little ball go that way. And you say, well, gee, this isn't a video game. This is a very serious, important, statistically based game. But I like it when the ball goes up high, but you can't tell if it's going to go over the fence or come into the field. I love that. That's capturing, right, that experience that you and I want to capture when we play games. It's the ball got hit, and ooh, it might be a home run, but it might just be a routine fly ball. I don't know yet. And watching that play out, that's what I enjoy on the computer. And on the dice, it's just a variety of results. And obviously, we have to picture what's happening, but that's just so easy for us because we enjoy doing that, and that's sort of the experience we're seeking.
And as a math mind, have you ever thought about designing your own game, or have you ever gone in and kind of really tweaked some things that just were nagging issues to you?
Thought you'd never ask. In fourth grade, we were in a history class, including the ancient Greek history, and we had to do a class project. And I made my own board game of the ancient Greek Olympics. I brought it into class. I made pieces, all with paper, no plastic. And the teacher liked it. And we actually had, like, the whole class was playing my Olympics for one day, or maybe it was part of it. And then I was in a sixth grade intermediate school that actually had computers at a time when that was very rare. And I was exposed to a very primitive basketball game through that system. And I ended up actually years later, it took a lot of work, writing my own basketball game program, but it was still too early. There weren't even hard drives, at least for home computers. We had external drives. We were loading things off literally a cassette player back then. So that it was just too early, too soon. And as my life moved on, I didn't have the time to invest into it, nor was it anything special. I didn't have any like secret sauce or anything like that. It was just my game. But especially once the computer stuff came out and I jumped on that, my sort of involvement in creation side was to give feedback to those who were doing it already, and in that way have a little input in what they did.
Going forward from here, what's on your immediate gaming horizon?
Wow, actually you and not just meeting with you, but watching some of your other podcasts, especially the Board Game Buds with the 4 Hall of Famers, that has really given me an impetus to take some things off the shelves, and try and do some more board gaming. Time wise and convenience wise, to the extent I have time, I play the computer stuff because it's just easier and fun. But I think I'd like to put some more time into the board side. I know you guys have talked about, obviously you can play by Zoom and whatnot. I've never done that myself. I clearly see how it would work, but I think that might be fun. But I don't have any, it's just to have fun with the time that's available. I do regret, and if anybody's listening to this and does it, I regret that I didn't bring a game to the Field of Dreams, because you can just walk on and do whatever you want. And the bleachers are there too. It's very small, but you can sit on the same bleachers. And it would have been so easy to bring dice, 2 teams and a board, and just roll some dice when I was there. I just didn't think of it. As you mentioned, Central Park, maybe things like that. Playing in a unique place or a fun place, I think that would be pretty cool. So those are some of the things that I've been thinking of.
Nice. Awesome. Look for Anthony Giacobbe at a special site near you. You never know where the dice are going to roll.
Another good friend of mine who's no longer with us, a guy named Pete Cava. He actually wrote this book, Tales from the Cubs Dugout. he was a lifelong APBA player who worked for USA Track and Field and actually shared the game with some people there. And they used to play on the 50-yard line of the Hoosier Dome, which I think is now Lucas Oil Stadium. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Pete and his memory and his legacy. And then I know there are many people like that. But when you have somebody who's a good person and loves the game and shares it, Pete gave a 51 card set, his 51, not the original, don't get excited, to my son when my son was playing. And I think it's important for all of us, and you mentioned it in your Board Game Buds podcast, to keep alive the memories of those who made significant contributions and pass that forward. So I wanted to just, thanks for letting me do it, to give a shout out to Pete on his memory as someone who loved APBA and baseball.
That's awesome. Thank you for that remembrance. That's brilliant. It's always good to remember our great friends we make in this pursuit. Thank you so much, Anthony. Again, a real pleasure. Maybe we can get together a little APBA Journal reunion sometime here online, at least.
I would love that. You and I are fairly close, so we could probably make that work now that we're allowed out again, right?
That's right. There you go. Anthony, enjoy the rest of your weekend, man.
Thanks,
and hopefully we get to even roll a game sometime. Let's talk about it.
Thank you for having me.
You got it. Take care.
Bye.